So, as we begin day 2 of Buddhism, yesterday we were talking about the marks of existence, things that everybody has to deal with: impermanence and change, suffering. And now we're going to start off with one of the more complicated things, the concept of no self. So, the idea of no self, I like this quote from William James: "We are like islands in the sea, separate on the surface, but connected in the deep." As we grow up and our egoic mind tends to take over, we see ourselves as being completely separate and not relying on anybody else. It's sort of us versus the world. The aim of Eastern philosophy is to shift your self-identity from being the light bulb to being the light. Now, what does that mean? We see ourselves as individual light bulbs in terms of individual beings, but in terms of the light, anything that's alive would be something that shares the light. So I have a hard time teaching this because it's really one of those things, you either get it or you don't. The idea of the self, and on one level it's hard to understand, it's an illusion to think that we're separate from the world around us. The idea of the ego is needing to be a more than to make yourself separate. But Eastern philosophy, they believe, generally speaking, the self is your ego. It's just your likes and dislikes. It's always changing. It's not who you truly are. Once again, instead of being an individual light bulb, and we are all individual and unique, it's the things that we share in common, the similar light that basically, we all have blood that courses through our veins, be it animal or person. In some ways, we are the same and we are connected. This is the idea of the oversoul extended. Buddhist auto repair. Is my car ready? There is no car. So, once you begin to identify basically as being a separate I, me, mine, and you think of yourself always in that way, the separation that you cause between you and the rest of the world often causes us to suffer. I mean, in the Advaita Vedanta PowerPoint, we talked about everybody's always looking to be connected, to be once again rejoined into the one that we once were when we were just born and we didn't realize that there was us and the other people and other things. They think that the identification of ourselves as being separate is one of the reasons we suffer. In separateness lies the world's greatest mystery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. So Buddhism really takes, in today's PowerPoint, their attitudes about things like love and kindness and our natural Buddha nature has to do with compassion and empathy, and that's something that's usually not as possible when it's us versus the world in the egoic-minded separateness. So, if we're not separate, what are we? They would say we're interconnected to everything. That's the sort of the tree of life with roots that extend off in the distance. Here's from Deepak Chopra. Don't simply dismiss a coincidence and let it drift away. Life is totally interconnected. These unusual things are simply connections that surprise you because you aren't used to seeing life except in fragments. Now it's beginning to piece itself together. We talked about coincidences in regards to the Adjustment Bureau film. Is everything a coincidence, or does life have a way of working itself out? So this is another thing that a lot of kids have issue with. They have a belief called dependent origination, and they said that nothing exists independently. Everything is cause and effect. Everything is mutually dependent on everything else. And that's just their belief system. And it brings us to the bees, and we've talked about the bees' ability to pollinate. We've talked about the murder hornets, which they found killing the bees, and how that down channel is going to affect us. Einstein quote, I don't know if Einstein actually said this or not, but it's often attributed to him. If the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would have only 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man. So I think we've gone over this, but just to restate, since it's a slide of my PowerPoint, without the bees, we're not going to have pollination. 90% of the world is fed by crops that are pollinated by the bees. We are connected to them. But on a different level, a truck driver. Without a truck driver, there's no food in our grocery store. Every strawberry you ever eat, this is according to Jack Kornfield, every strawberry you ever eat, because they're so fragile, they're usually picked by hand by somebody with calluses on their knees, with a sweatband to wipe off the sweat. We don't think that when we're enjoying our strawberry, nor do we need to. But the idea that you begin to have a little more compassion and empathy when you realize that we're not just in this by ourselves, that there is interconnection, even though if we don't want to see it. Emptiness is another concept. To me, it's one of the better concepts that come out of Buddhism. It's their way of perception. It's the way they look at what's happening. It says it adds nothing to and takes nothing away from the raw data of mental and physical events. It is what it is. They tend to try to look at the world with an empty mindset. Not saying that they're completely dumb, but they try to get rid of all of their preconceived notions. A thing is a thing, not what is said of that thing. We add the drama in terms of our mind being full of lots of concepts. This mood they call emptiness is empty of all of the stories, thoughts, and judgments, opinions that we add to experience. In other words, life is here we come up with a bad example off the top of my head. Life is a soup. And it is what it is. And then our mind adds flavorings to it. And generally our flavorings we add make the soup very bitter. They try to get us back to just, it is what it is. Accept what's there. Don't add your own flavoring to it. Buddhist compliment. I've never met anyone so thoughtless in my life. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Master. The idea of being thoughtless in our culture is obviously you're wrong. You don't think of anybody else. But in Buddhism, they try not to have unnecessary thoughts. When you need to use the mind as a tool, then use it, think. But why have the non-stop chatter from morning to night, the jackhammer of our thoughts? If you're more empty, you can actually hear your intuition, and then you can take in the world without your own flavorings. Bruce Lee, the usefulness of the cup is its emptiness, that it can hold things. But our minds become full, so we're not actually seeing what is. We're just looking for confirmation for what we already think is. So emptiness, right at the top. I can't believe I slept with my sister's fiance, got amnesia, poisoned my first husband, embezzled money from the local orphanage, and no one cares. The idea of emptiness is we've got these stories in our head. They're dramas. And people will think, oh, you're talking about high school drama. No, I'm talking about every last story that you tell yourself about anything that happened. Somebody pats you on the head and you say, oh my God, I'm a special snowflake. Or somebody, is mean to you and you think how rude they are. They must not like me because my left hip is bigger than my right hip. And whatever the nonsense your stories are, and everybody's stories are nonsense, basically, these stories basically pull our attention away from the direct experience of what's actually happening. So maybe a clown walks in the room and you had some bad experience with clowns when you're 9. You're going to be triggered. You're not going to see the clown who might be, some kid who's never seen a clown before, been horrified by the thing that is a clown. That kid's going to be looking at it like, oh, wow, that's cute. Although I doubt that's true. Nobody enjoys clowns. The I, me, mine. From the Buddhist perspective, the more you get stuck in these stories, the more you're going to get distracted from what the actual cause of your suffering is, which is I and me and mine. You are causing the suffering by your stories. Your I, me, mine sets the whole process in motion. If somebody in the other class said, a teacher made me feel stupid. And I said, well, what did the teacher do? Well, I don't know. They just gave me a look. Well, I mean, there are some negative looks that people can give you that would basically try to get across the idea you're stupid. But a lot of times people infer, they fill in the gaps, they complete the sentence, they read between the lines, however you want to say it. They read something that's not there in reality. The I, me, mine creates its own stories. This is a classic picture. It shows probably a Western guy yelling at a Buddha Eastern guy, I want happiness. And the Buddha guy takes the sign. First I remove I, that's your ego. Then I remove want, that's your desire. And now you're left with happiness. Well, that's all cute and easier said than done, says the Western cop-out. The idea, though, if you're going around thinking I, want, you're probably not going to be happy. So, Buddhists believe that if you teach emptiness, then you're going to not have as many attachments. You're not going to have all of your opinions that are going to be so strong, because what happens is, and think about like Star Wars and Darth Vader, when your mind is full of stuff, it's usually full of inferiority things and wanting to fix it. Greed, anger, delusion, they all come from this. Anxiety, the self-hatred come from this. The empty mind is just taking what's happening in that moment. Truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. Longing means desires. Truth is there right in front of us, it's happening, but our eyes are usually clouded or obscured by our desire, so we can't really see what's happening. You know, your boyfriend's cheated on you 9 times, but he's a good boy, or whatever the nonsense is. Your desire is causing you not to see the truth. I think I had this picture earlier in the year. It feels good to empty the trash. The idea of Buddhism, if you can empty your mind of all of the baggage that you've been carrying around, the wall of your own thoughts, the prison, once you free yourself from that, you're kind of free just to be in the moment. Easier said than done, but try it. Now we move on to loving kindness and compassion. One of the big concepts of Buddhism is the idea that the right way of acting, of conduct, is to try to spread loving kindness to all beings, to have compassion for all beings. There's a story. There was a Native American boy, and he had been picked on at school, and he came home, and he was just so angry. He was like 11 or 12. And he was sitting by his grandfather, who was whittling a stick with a knife, and the grandfather asked him what was wrong, and the grandson told him that he was just so full of anger because of what had happened. And the grandfather said, "Let me tell you a story. There are 2 wolves that live inside of me. One wolf, the black wolf, he's angry. He always feels like he needs to defend himself, get the last word. And then I have a white wolf. He's full of kindness and compassion. And they fight all of the time within me." And the grandson said, "Well, Grandpa, which one's going to win?" And the grandfather says, "Whichever one I feed will win. If we feed negative ideas to our mindset, to the dark wolf within us, we're going to be full of negativity. Whereby if we try to put out loving kindness to others, it tends to come back. The idea when you spread happiness, it's like a fragrance you can't help but get onto you as well." To be beautiful means to be yourself. You don't need to be accepted by others. You need to accept yourself. The Western mind will immediately say, "Oh, this is cheesy," but the concept of loving yourself, of accepting yourself from that place, once you've done that, then you feel good enough that you can actually try to spread that to others. So loving kindness is to try and give enjoyment and joy and happiness to others. If you actually try to extend that care and consideration, realizing maybe that we are interconnected, the mind then becomes more connected to life. Instead of me and nobody likes me and woe is me, when you try to spread that sort of like pay it forward idea of spreading joy and kindness and consideration to others, then you feel more attached, more connected, and then our true nature basically begins to thrive. They call it your Buddha nature, the kindness that's what's in us that's been covered up by our ego. This is the Dalai Lama in class. I don't know if I'll show it to you this year, but there's a nice little video of him. Be kind whenever possible. It's always possible. The Dalai Lama is the leader of the Tibetan school of Buddhism, and he's still alive, and he's considered one of the leaders of Buddhism. We'll just put it that way.
Brothers and sisters, indeed I'm very happy.
But what does happiness mean to a Buddhist such as the Dalai Lama?
I usually describe happiness in the sense more satisfaction. Happiness not necessarily some pleasure sort of experience, but neutral sort of experience can bring deep satisfaction.
In your experience, what makes you truly happy?
I believe the peace of mind. That peace of mind also is to come firstly from heartiness. That I think reduce ill feeling towards others and also reduce this sort of distrust. I always open. I never consider myself as something special. If I consider myself something different from you, like I'm Buddhist, even more I'm His Holiness Dalai Lama, or even if you consider I'm Nobel laureate, then actually you create yourself as a prisoner. I forget these things. I simply consider I'm one of the 7 billion human beings. We are mentally, emotionally, intellectually, we are same.
A point he rather inadvertently proved through an unexpected story about gas.
When in aeroplane, sometimes this gas problem comes, then you see, difficult to let out. So occasionally, you see, look around, then remain like that. It's the ultimate source of satisfaction within ourselves. If you do wrong things, mainly harming others, you get negative consequences. If you do helping others, bring more happiness to others, you get benefit. More inner strength there, and more sort of confidence of purpose of life and fulfillment about that purpose, then you always feel happy. When we are young, very much sort of alive, these inner value. And we grown up, particularly the society where not much talking about these values. Only talks when we read newspaper or television, sports or money, a number of dollars, like that. And all the appetizing, some because of the material values. No one telling, no one sort of explaining the importance of warm-heartedness.
Despite this, he says there is a lot to be happy about if we only look in the right places.
Early part of 20th century, later part of 20th century, much positive change took place. I think world, yes, there is a lot of crisis, a lot of bad things, but also is a lot of good things.
And yet, we have been taught to fear anyone and everyone, a reality, he says, that is impacting one of the fundamentals of human happiness.
So, we are a social animal. Therefore, friendship is very essential. Friendship comes trust. Fear and trust go contradiction. More fear there cannot develop trust. With fear, how can develop friendship?
It's little wonder then that loneliness has become the #1 cause of depression in the West.
And a big city, a lot of people, but just think oneself, self-centered attitude, and no idea or sense of love. Then, too much competitive sense, then jealousy. Jealousy brings distrust. Distrust brings frustration. So therefore, and fear. Then the lonely feeling automatically comes. So lonely feeling is not creation of environment, but creation of your own mental attitude.
But the thought leader says there is hope if only we could seek a slightly different goal.
I think eventually we can develop more deeper sort of the experience about our life. make some kind of pledge. Now on, I must make a new person. Same body, but new person. Too much greed, limitless sort of desire, also source of problem, source of suffering, individual also. If you always keep the feeling one more, until the last day, that person never satisfied, always want more. So mentally, that's a very poor person, always hungry. That's someone who is a poor family, but their daily necessity fulfilled, then remain happily. That's, I think, mentally really richer, isn't it? So I think the contentment also very important. But then I do believe the all major religious tradition, so all have the same potential to create harmony, to create peace of mind. So sometimes you see people very genuine, feeling. Sometimes their effect remain limited. Once politicians or some other people, once they, due to their behavior, due to their speech, sometimes you see the things become more complicated. Then these people's effort remain very limited. Yes, too much emotion. I think negative emotion, frustrations, hatred, anger. That's the greatest obstacle. So I think as a first step, these too much emotions, too much negative emotion, this should be cooled down, reduce, forget these things. I think for the time being, I think more festivals, more sort of picnics. Let people forget these difficult things, these emotions, and make personal friend.
Immediately makes him, laugh. He immediately laugh, and sometimes it can be a little embarrassing. But the other good thing is he always laughs about himself also.
If you were President of the United States, how would you persuade the Chinese to leave Tibet? Please be specific.
Use this.
In order.
So here's a story. This is a true story. There was a large temple in Thailand, and they had a big Buddha. It was clay. Big, enormous thing. It wasn't beautiful, but it had been there forever. And it had been cared for over 500 years. So all of the Buddhist monks would just make sure that when there were cracks in the clay, that they just kept it going. And had been violent storms and government changes and armies, and yet the heavy clay Buddha was still there 500 years later. Well, at one point, one of the monks who was basically looking at the Buddha realized that there was a crack that was beginning to form in the big clay. And it was really hot one day, and he took a flashlight and he shone it in. And what happened when he shone the flashlight into the crack in the Buddha is light flashed back. There was gold under that clay. Here's a picture of the actual Buddha that had been covered in clay for 500 years. Now, the clay that had gone over the gold Buddha had been put there during times of conflict to protect it. They had covered it in clay. And the story, and this is why it's sort of relevant, in the same way, we tend to, when we have threatening bad situations, we tend to cover ourselves up. The ego is something to protect ourselves, to go, oh my God, I better not go over there. That's bad. That's the ego thinking of you in your best interest. But once we usually actually have a situation that threatens us and we build up that ego, it's like we put that clay covering over to protect ourselves. And just like the monks forgot that over 500 years that there was a golden Buddha inside of us, most of us also forget our essential nature. We're so in conflict and so defensive and so protecting ourselves. That protective layer, that clay layer, is what our ego is. Buddhist psychology, and actually now American psychology is using a lot of Buddhism, just tries to get you to realize that you have put this self-imposed armor over you, that clay armor, your defensive ego, and that perhaps within you there is this gold statue, which is what they call your Buddha nature, your original goodness, the love and compassion that you have. There's the actual statue, 10 feet high, 5 tons, $250 million worth of gold, probably a lot more. And better than that, just for the story that it represents for Buddhism, the inner Buddha nature that we have within us is full of gold and empathy. And I think a lot of people who don't have empathy, it has to do with that protective layer that they have made around themselves that keeps them separate. Compassion. Well, compassion goes along with the love and kindness when you begin to recognize that suffering in others and you wish it was less. Nobody wants others to suffer more unless you're a psycho. When you have more compassion, you truly want to help others without any gain. Like, I'm not gaining anything by helping you, but I'm going to try to help you because I want to spread compassion and joy. There's an old story of a man who went to a beach and he saw that there was another man at the beach and there had been, 10,000 starfish had washed upon the shore. And the one man on the beach was taking starfish by starfish and bringing them back to the water. And the second man said, "What are you doing? You're wasting your time. There's like 10,000. You're never going to, what difference are you going to make? 10,000 starfish, you're not going to make any difference trying to put them in the water." And he said, "I'm making a difference to each one that I help." And we can't change the world, but we can hopefully maybe spread a little bit compassion to others. So why is Buddhism becoming popular? Because definitely in the last 15 years, it's sprung up in the Western world. Well, our society, especially America, is based so much on more materialism and social status. And Buddhism is the very thing that tries to give you the deep understanding to show that these two ways of life are not conducive to long-term happiness. So just to review over the couple of days, it tries to give answers to how life works. That's sort of the knowledge or the awakening. Everyone should always try to show loving kindness because we're all interconnected, even if we don't realize we are. And then things like accepting and not resisting what we can't change, becoming more aware in the present moment, you can become content. And finally, the idea of desires. Desires bring suffering. And we'll leave off with a little story. Nasruddin, who is the Weasley monk, he was a beggar at one point, and some sort of god saw him begging on the street, and Nasruddin looked particularly dirty and poor that day as a beggar, and the god took his finger, and he went up to a small stone next to Nasruddin, and he touched the stone, and it turned the stone to God. Turned the stone to gold, excuse me. The god looked at Nasruddin, expecting him to be pleased, and Nasruddin just looked at him with a look of like, "That's it?" And the god thought, "Well, that's odd." So he took his finger and touched a larger rock and turned it to gold, thinking that would make Nasruddin happy. Nasruddin still had a look of just disgust. So the god was like, "What a peculiar human." And he took his finger and he touched a large boulder that was right next to Nasruddin and turned it to gold. And Nasruddin just looked at him with no reaction. And the god was just perplexed. And Nasruddin said, "Is that it?" And the god said, "What do you want? Like, what more can I give you?" Nasruddin says, "I want your finger. I want the ability to turn things to gold." And that's the thing. Rather than just accepting what we have, our desire obscures it and it makes us unhappy. So the goal of Buddhism, well, we've talked about contentment in other places. You can be happy when your mind becomes empty of your stories and you realize the joy that we share among one another. So hopefully you got something out of this. Please write a journal, and we will talk again soon.